Hey, good afternoon. 306 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, we'll talk to Joe Kent, retired Green Beret combat veteran, about that escalating situation in Syria as in the waning days of the Biden administration, they've begun firing missiles into that country. We'll find out the latest there. A lot of chaos going on in Syria. Batya Ungar-Sargon is here, opinion editor over at Newsweek at 4 o'clock. We talked to her about the Daniel Penny trial as that hero Marine walks away acquitted today after a roller coaster ride of jury deliberations over the course of the last week. More details on that ahead. And then Sean Spicer is here at 5 o'clock. He'll react to President Trump's big interview. He sits down with NBC's Meet the Press over the weekend, and that went about as you'd expect. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I want to send a special thank you, first and foremost, to everybody who came out to see us at the Fair Oaks Mall on Friday. We had an excellent broadcast. It was such a great time seeing so many WMAL listeners, so many Fisher House supporters out there, and it was just such a great weekend, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for the Fisher House yet again this year. So please, if you supported that or if you told somebody about it, I just give yourself a round of applause. It was just such a nice gesture by this great WMAL audience to once again take care of the men and women of the military through these Fisher Houses, which really do have angels on earth working there. So thank you again for that. Our radiothon may be over, but of course you can support the Fisher House any time of year, and we really do encourage you to do that. They're just such a great, wonderful organization. So thank you for that. We do have a ton of breaking news this afternoon. A lot of it is legal news coming out of New York or related to New York. The NYPD today has taken a person of interest into custody in the death of that United Healthcare CEO, and they found him in the suspect, that is, in Altoona, Pennsylvania, inside of a McDonald's, sitting down eating at a McDonald's, they said, earlier today, recognized, according to law enforcement, by one of the employees of the McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, spotting him eating at the restaurant, presumably at this point doesn't have a mask on because he's consuming food, sees the face, recognizes it from the images that are everywhere in the media, calls the local Altoona police. They show up at the restaurant. They take the guy into custody. And sure enough, in case you're looking for early indicators that it's the same person, he had a gun on him, he had a silencer on him, and he had 4 fake IDs, they say, as well as other items that they say are consistent with what authorities were looking for in the case. And that includes, I believe, a 3-page manifesto is being discussed here. Additionally, the cops are claiming that it looks like the gun is a, quote, ghost gun. It doesn't have a serial number on it. And they believe that it may very well have been components of it, at least, 3D printed. So that might explain some of what we saw last week in that video. You saw the gun jammed up a couple of times as he was attempting to pass. They say it was 9mm ammunition through it now. And that could be a product of it being a 3D printed weapon, not some sort of, well-designed, well-crafted weapon, but instead maybe 3D printed. I guess we'll find out more. These are the claims they're making right now. Again, the NYPD is making a lot of these claims from a distance as the suspect remains in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and they're looking to get him extradited to New York. So there's still a lot of things going on here. He's been identified as a 26-year-old by the name of Luigi Mangione, described by the New York Post as a, quote, tech whiz from Towson, Maryland. And he apparently hated the medical community because of how it treated his sick relative, sources said to the New York Post. He's not been charged in the slaying, but he was taken into custody this morning while eating at that McDonald's in Altoona, ending an intense manhunt sparked by the cold-blooded execution of Brian Thompson, that's the United Healthcare CEO, outside of that Manhattan hotel last week. The former prep school valedictorian was caught with a ghost gun. He went to prep school. He went to an all-boys prep school just outside of Baltimore. He was caught with a ghost gun, the New York Post says, that uses 9mm bullets, a silencer, a U.S. passport, 4 fake IDs with names used during the killer's stint in New York City, and the manifesto, they say. Yeah. You do wonder, why did he keep all of the stuff on him? We're going on almost a week. Why did he keep all this stuff on him? There's the psychology, the forensic psychology here is probably all over the place. You do hear, I heard Jonathan Turley describing earlier that sometimes that's the case, that they keep kind of the mementos of the killing because there's a kind of a thrill kill, that it's like they find some pride perhaps in the killing, so they keep all the components with them. I mean, additionally, he's on the run, so what he's doing is he's carrying all of this evidence with him. Presumably, if he's carrying a manifesto, insofar as we can dig into this, maybe he's thinking, well, if I do get captured, I want the world to know why I did it. Perhaps that's what the motivation is here. So, and we still don't have any explanation as of yet as to why the words were written on the bullets. Remember, each of the bullets, the casings, had different words written on them. They looked an awful lot like the title of a book that was critical of the healthcare industry. And perhaps that was his motivation, given that that's what appears to be what the New York Post is learning about why he would have targeted this United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. So we're learning a lot. We're learning a lot. There's, of course, as you would expect, the sort of normal, like looking through his social media, trying to assess his politics. The cops today were describing him as having anti-corporate sentiments, that he's opposed to big corporations. He's shared videos and posts online concerned about the impact cell phones are having on young people, which, by the way, is a perfectly good conversation to have, with the impact that cell phones are having on young people, and any number of concerns about the way things are going in various countries, in Japan, population shrinking. So his politics, not easiest in the world to nail down, but it does seem like he has kind of an anti-corporate vibe going on. But regardless, expressing animosity towards these healthcare industry groups and then taking it out. It's one thing to be critical of the healthcare industry or health insurance companies or saying that they're stiffing people, but it's another to assassinate someone on the street. It's not a justification for taking a weapon and then killing someone in a cold-blooded murder at all. And that's what you have. But it's going to be weird for all the lefties last week who were cheering on the assassination and saying, this is good, this is good. They're still, to this day, they've been doing that. But now they're going to be rooting through his politics, trying to figure out, well, what does he believe in? Is he on our side? I don't really know. It's nice to not have to live in that world, isn't it? It's nice to not have to, is this guy one of ours? No. I never once am I like that. That's like the dumbest tribal politics I can even imagine. My views are really simple. I have criticisms. I don't believe that you should assassinate people in the street. That's very simple. I don't know. Does it get more simple than that? Seems like a basic way to conduct yourself. So as we learn more, we'll get back to that story. Additionally, other New York City news today, that hero Marine, Daniel Penny, the man who stopped a psychopath from hurting people on a subway train, has been acquitted now on negligent homicide. Remember, manslaughter, the more punishing charge of manslaughter, was thrown out last week because the jury had deadlocked. They kept coming back to the judge, and they said, sorry, we can't get past this deadlock. The judge finally agreeing to dismiss that charge and instead just stick with manslaughter. Negligent homicide here. And the jury deliberated, and boy, they came back with not guilty. They came back with not guilty, which, Jonathan Turley today, speaking of Turley, he must have come back. He came back and he said, man, this must have been a real surprise for Alvin Bragg, because think about the circumstances last week. You have a jury deadlocking on the tougher charge here of manslaughter, and saying, well, obviously there must have been one holdout who was like, this guy is guilty, and everyone else is saying, no, he's not guilty. This guy's the hero of this tale. And then they get to this lesser charge of negligent homicide, and the whole jury says not guilty. So what changed over the weekend? Clearly, this juror who was the holdout flipped in the direction of decency. And that must have shocked the hell out of Alvin Bragg, because they thought that this thing was going to be a slam dunk. Take a listen to Turley today.
Well, I think that the most surprised person in that room may be Alvin Bragg, because you have a jury that apparently couldn't agree on the more serious offense, but then they came back and they said, but we do agree that he's not guilty of the lesser offense. So it's not exactly how this was supposed to play out in his view. And you keep in mind that this is a jury that received an Allen charge. And so that's where the court says, go back and try again. It's a favorite charge of prosecutors because jurors often do then produce a compromise verdict, a conviction for the prosecutor.
So they were fishing for a guilty verdict here, and they failed to catch it. They got a little nibbles, but they never got a bite. And so that's the end. That's the end. So Daniel Penny able to walk out of that courtroom today. He had a beer. He went to a bar with his attorneys. They had a beer. The New York Post and other news outlets caught up with them, figured out where they were. They enjoyed their beers, and then they ducked out, got into some cars, and left. But it was a good opportunity for Daniel Penny. They said it was the first time that he was able to be emotional. The very first time. And here's a Fox News reporter saying that it's the first time she's seen him visibly smile throughout this entire process.
The first time we've seen some real emotion from Daniel Penny. His attorneys told me this morning that this trial has understandably taken a toll on him. He's been spending time with family and friends to try to stay calm. And our courtroom reporter telling me for the first time she sees him visibly smile, now hearing that jurors have decided he is not guilty of criminally negligent homicide.
Okay, and then meanwhile, outside, you can hear a little bit in the background there of that stand-up. That's her standing outside the courthouse. You can hear in the background there are people who are screaming their heads off. It's not in support for Daniel Penny. In fact, it's in opposition to Daniel Penny. There have been organized protests designed to attack him. They've been calling him the subway strangler. They're trying to treat him as the villain in this story. And here's one of the anti-Daniel Penny lunatics standing outside the courthouse after the verdict.
We got to stop that. We have to change how we impact each other. Jordan came on that subway car. The first thing he asked for was food, and he was killed. And the person who killed him was not held responsible.
That's not even close to the story. So Jordan Neely, he came onto the subway, and he just asked for food, and then he was killed. That's the whole story. So if that's the version of events that you heard, you think, oh, that's awful. Daniel Penny killed a man who merely asked for food? No, not at all. Here's Daniel Penny himself describing what happened that day.
Well, I live in the East Village in Manhattan, so I take the subway multiple times a day. In this instance, I was coming from school. I got out of class around 2:15, and I took I was at J Street Metro Tech, took the Uptown F train. At 2nd Avenue, a man came on, stumbled on. He appeared to be on drugs. The doors closed, and he ripped his jacket off and threw it at the people sitting down to my left. I was listening to music at the time, and he was yelling, so I took my headphones out to hear what he was yelling. And the three main threats that he repeated over and over was, I'm going to kill you, I'm prepared to go to jail for life, and I'm willing to die.
That sounds an awful lot like I'm hungry, doesn't it?
You know, this was a scary situation, and Mr. Neely came on. He was threatening. I'm 6'2", and he was taller than me, so it was. And there's a common misconception that Marines don't get scared. We're actually taught one of our core values is courage, and courage is not the absence of fear, but how you handle fear.
Well, it sure is. And he's not alone in describing the events this way. Here's the 911 audio of a woman. This was played at the trial of a woman who called the cops as you had Daniel Penny holding Jordan Neely back from everybody on the train.
Yeah, City 911. You need police, fire, medical.
Hi, we need an ambulance and cops. We just need a cop at Broadway Lafayette Street. Someone's attacking here at the train.
This is inside the train station?
Yes.
Okay, Broadway Lafayette, uptown, downtown platform.
Uptown.
Okay, and this is the F, right?
Yeah.
Male or female being attacked?
I don't know. He's trying to attack everybody.
Oh, a guy's trying to do it. Okay, give me further description. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Indian?
He's black.
What color shirt?
They're holding them down. They're holding him down right now.
How many people?
There's just two. There's one man holding white man holding it down, holding the homeless guy down.
Okay. Any weapons? Anybody injured at this time?
No, nobody.
Okay, they're coming as we speak. This is not delaying a thing. You want to leave your name and number or no?
No.
Okay, they're going to be there as soon as possible.
All right, so the cops are heading over there, and when the cops get there, their body cameras are rolling. And listen to this witness who describes what happened.
I can tell you what happened.
Yeah, what happened?
He was there, right? I was in before him. Then he came in, like, he put, like, his hand so he could come in, right? Okay. I guess he was pissed or something, but I looked at him, right? And then he started taking off his sweater, dummy hard, and then he threw it. And then he told, like, everyone that he had, like, a rough day and that he don't care what happens today. He don't care about going to jail, but that someone's dying today.
He doesn't care about going to jail and someone's dying today. So there you have not just Daniel Penny. You have a 911 call. You have another witness. You have other people who are helping Daniel Penny hold Jordan Neely down on that train. And this has been distorted beyond recognition to the point that today, outside of that courthouse, not only do you have people misrepresenting the facts, oh, he just said, Jordan Neely said he was hungry, and then he got killed. That's not what happened. You also have people who are calling for violence today. You know, outside that courthouse in New York in the wake of this Daniel Penny verdict, not guilty. Big day for that Marine. Thank goodness. It should have never gotten to this place at all. Stupid Alvin Bragg. You've got a guy called Hawk Newsom who fancies himself a BLM leader calling for black vigilantes to hurt white people?
Just like everybody else has vigilantes, we need some black vigilantes.
That's right.
People want to jump up and choke us and kill us for being loud. How about we do the same when they attempt to oppress us?
Right.
I'm tired.
Eyes on that guy as he quickly becomes a threat to the community there. And so he wasn't alone. There's people claiming they're going to.
Tonight we're going to they're going to hear us tonight. Y'all going to get y'all money tonight.
Y'all going to get your money's worth tonight, mother bleepers, they're yelling. Sounds like a lovely crowd. New York in chaos because decency won out. So, of course, they have to riot. Coming up, Joe Kent will be with us. We'll talk to that veteran, that Gold Star husband, about what's happening in Syria, where things are escalating and the Biden administration has begun bombing. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 3:35. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, top of the hour, Batya Ungar-Sargon joins us. She'll give us her thoughts on the Daniel Penny trial and so much more. And then at 5 o'clock, Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary, host of the Sean Spicer Show, is here. We talked to him about President Trump's sit-down with NBC's Meet the Press, what he thought of it. And we'll chat with you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Headlines pouring in the United States this weekend and all around the world as Syria's President Bashar al-Assad fled the country for Russia, where he now is, as we are told that rebels and the Syrian army have announced the end of his 24-year-old regime. The Syrian rebels capturing the country's capital of Damascus. Here to discuss what this news means and so much more, we bring in Joe Kent now. He's a retired Green Beret combat veteran and a Gold Star husband. Joe's wife was killed in Syria. Joe, good to have you with us today, sir. Thank you.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we get this news. Assad has been displaced, and now I'm seeing that the new leader, at least the rebel leader who is kind of in charge of the whole thing, has been a member of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and al-Nusra. So tell me how this is a good thing for the United States or anyone.
It's not. We should be very wary of what comes next in Syria. No doubt Assad was, by any measurement, a brutal dictator, but he did not pose a direct threat to the United States of America. Now, these so-called rebels are just a rebranded version of Al-Qaeda and in many cases a rebranded version of ISIS. The guy they're rolling out right now in front, Mohammed al-Jawlani, he spent a lot of time fighting Americans in Iraq. We even detained him for a period of time in Iraq, and then he went over to Syria, joined ISIS, split off from ISIS just a few years ago. He was swearing allegiance to Ayman al-Zawahiri before he was killed, the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden's number 2. And that's who's now running the country. So we should be very apprehensive about what comes after Assad.
Yeah. Well, I saw that CNN did an interview with this guy a couple weeks ago, al-Jawlani, and he claims that he's a changed man. He doesn't really agree with the tactics of the terror organizations that he's associated with. He's associated with the worst of the worst, as you just laid out. And then President Biden himself came out this weekend and signaled his support for the rebel takeover of Damascus and had this to say, kind of in a vague way, about al-Jawlani.
Make no mistake, some of the rebel groups that took down Assad have their own grim record of terrorism and human rights abuses. We've taken note of statements by the leaders of these rebel groups in recent days, and they're saying the right things now. But as they take on greater responsibility, we will assess not just their words, but their actions.
I've never seen a politician do this. Lifelong terrorists are now saying the right things, so we're cautiously optimistic? What is that?
It's just absolutely absurd. I mean, he's saying the quiet part out loud. Under the Obama administration, we launched a disastrous covert action program that's now been declassified that funded a lot of these different factions. We drew the line at ISIS, but we were supporting known elements of Al-Qaeda, Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham, which is now the current organization, because they were working against Assad, and we were looking to topple Assad and kind of deal a strategic blow to the Iranians and to the Russians. We cozied up with these jihadis, and now we're just sort of supposed to take the jihadis' word for it that, look, they've changed and they're saying all the right things. Again, look, we've seen this movie before. We saw what happened in the aftermath of Saddam being toppled, Gaddafi being toppled in Libya,
yes,
Mubarak in Egypt. And look, these jihadis, a big debate that the jihadis have always had is, do we go full-on jihadi right away and start chopping off heads and imposing Sharia? And that's the tactic that Al-Qaeda in Iraq and ISIS took. But then you've had a much more subtle version through the Muslim Brotherhood that says, hey, we need to effectively govern first, and that's how we get our foothold, and then we can launch more sophisticated terrorist attacks against the West. And that was more of bin Laden and Al-Qaeda's approach. And so I think we're right now back to the more Al-Qaeda Muslim Brotherhood approach that we're seeing here in Syria being rolled out by Jawlani. So a lot of the people in the mainstream media that are saying, hey, this is great, the Syrians now have their freedom back, we've got to take that with a lot of skepticism and be very wary of America's involvement here. And keep in mind, we still have American troops deployed in Syria that are in harm's way right now.
The United States began conducting dozens of airstrikes yesterday on targets inside of Syria. That's the Biden administration started launching missiles in Syria. And the claim by U.S. Central Command is that they hit over 75, quote, known ISIS and al-Sham ISIS camps and operatives in central Syria. They struck the targets to, quote, disrupt, degrade, and defeat ISIS and render it incapable of exploiting the nation's current state to regroup in central Syria. So what the Biden administration is telling us here is, in the wake of this chaos that's already taking place in Syria, they're firing missiles into the country in order to bring about peace. Does that make sense?
They're trying to make it seem like there's still a massive ISIS threat inside of Syria to justify us keeping boots on the ground. When the fighting broke out earlier this weekend, CENTCOM announced they were doing so-called self-defense strikes, defending American troops that were deployed with the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the Kurdish umbrella group. And they did those against Iranian-backed militants. Now, the Iranian-backed militants are part of the Iraqi government that we fund, that were over there propping up Assad. And so we did airstrikes against them. And then once we did the airstrikes against them, who filled the void was a lot of these jihadis that are part of Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham, and maybe some are affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And now we're just saying, oh, look, Al-Qaeda's back, and now we can't leave. It's further justifying our presence there in Syria and trying to get us even more deeply entrenched into this as President Trump comes back into office.
So it's long been kind of a policy of the United States, or if not said out loud, certainly unspoken, that they want to get rid of Assad. That has now occurred. Do you think it's a coincidence that this is taking place in the intervening time between the election and Inauguration Day here in the United States?
No, not at all. Look, they wanted to make sure that they could get this final disastrous regime change done before President Trump came in, because Trump attempted to get our troops out of Syria on two separate occasions. He said publicly this past weekend, this is not our fight. I think that Washington, D.C., the military-industrial complex, the intelligence community, they knew that Trump was going to come and pull the plug on this and really start putting our interests first. And so now, again, they've gotten us into this very big quagmire that's going to be very hard for us to extract ourselves from, and it makes things much more dynamic. Again, look, Assad was a bad guy, but we've seen what happens when there's a power vacuum when these leaders are taken out. It hasn't turned out well for us. It hasn't enhanced the security of the region, and it's actually made more.
You still there with us? Can you hear me? Joe Kent.
Between the election and between inauguration to attempt to get us further embedded into this conflict.
You broke up a little bit there, but what were you saying? What is the Biden administration doing between the election and the inauguration?
Oh, I think they are trying to get us more deeply embedded into this conflict. They knew that Trump was going to come and get us out of this conflict. And so right now they want to get us in the situation. If our troops out in the east embedded with the Kurdish forces, they want them to have a more permanent mission there. So they're saying, well, ISIS is back. We can't get out. Things are too uncertain. Because they knew that Trump was going to end this whole affair. Because really, at the end of the day, Assad did not pose a direct threat to America, and so now instead we've gotten rid of Assad, and now we have a regime in power that could most certainly pose a direct threat to America, and so it's going to prevent us from withdrawing our forces away from Syria.
So to what extent do you anticipate, and I think this is kind of the point you're getting at, that this new regime in Syria, whatever ends up shaped up as, will result in a rise of a terror threat equivalent to ISIS, that something like that, this is a vacuum meaningful enough for real terrorists to fill it?
I'd say it's more likely than not. I mean, look, these guys are rebranded Al-Qaeda. They may have different tactics than ISIS. They may not go full on, Sharia and slaughter of minority groups right away, but they are most certainly going to use their control of Syria, all of its resources, its very strategic location on the Mediterranean, next door to Israel, next door to Turkey, on Europe's doorstep. They're going to use that as a way to plan terror attacks and to launch terrorist attacks against the West. Every time we give the jihadis the ability to control ground, whether it's Afghanistan after the Soviets withdrew, or whether it's Afghanistan now after we withdrew, or whether it's under ISIS in Iraq and Syria and Libya, this is exactly what happens.
And also, just for as far as Israel is concerned, I'm not certain how this helps them exactly. Hamas is praising the Syrian rebels. They're thrilled with this. I think a lot of the conventional coverage right now is that because Assad was so closely linked to Iran, therefore it's good for Israel that Assad is deposed. But it does seem like kind of the new terror leadership of Syria is not that interested in doing any favors for Israel.
No, I mean, I would caution, our Israeli allies. It's a temporary tactical victory. They cut off the way that Hezbollah was resupplied by Iran via Syria. That's a small tactical victory, but overall, I don't think it benefits Israel's security to have jihadis running the Syrian government. Assad was many things, but at the end of the day, the guy was pragmatic. He cared about his power. I do believe you could cut a pragmatic deal with him, but I don't believe there's a deal to be cut with rabid jihadists. So I think in the long term, this is going to end up being a much bigger threat for Israel than Assad was.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts on Tulsi Gabbard. I know she's on the Hill today. The left, kind of in a low IQ assessment, was mocking her this weekend as, and Russia and Assad and Putin and sort of the basic sort of attacks that they launch against her constantly. She's a veteran who cares about the country and is always arguing for how can we bring about a peace. What do you think of her and her role as a top intelligence official for President Trump?
I couldn't think of someone better to be at the helm of our national intelligence apparatus right now than Tulsi Gabbard. She has been right about Syria, about Russia, about all these different very critical aspects of our national security for a very, very long time. She's always had a very America-first approach that aligns with President Trump's worldview, the same worldview the American people voted for in a landslide. And look, Tulsi's willing to go and not just put her life on the line as a soldier like she did in Iraq, like me and so many of our generation, but also when Obama was trying to get us deeply involved in a proxy war in Syria that has turned out to be a disaster, she went and got ground truth for herself. She went and actually had dialogue with Bashar al-Assad. And that is actually something that we do in the intelligence community. We go and we talk to our enemies and we try and get inside their head. So I can't think of someone who is better qualified to lead our intelligence community at a time like this than Tulsi Gabbard.
All right, awesome. Joe Kent, thank you very much. Retired Green Beret, combat veteran, Gold Star husband, former congressional candidate. Always so nice to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much for that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's Joe Kent. All right, let's see. Go to the phones. I've got George calling in from Jacksonville, Florida, where I assume it's warmer than it is here. Hello, George. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Thank you, Vince. And first of all, I love the program. You're my favorite of the MAL crowd. But anyway.
Well, I have good competition. That's high praise. Thank you.
Thank you. the Dems, as in their usual way, are being very, very hypocritical over Tulsi paying a visit of.
Oh, he just fell off. Did our whole call board just collapse too at the same time? So hopefully we get his call back. He's pointing out, he wanted to reference that Democrats are being, as you heard him begin to say, are being hypocrites when it comes to the idea that you would have a meeting or a conversation with Assad. He brought up two, as I understand it, was it Dennis Kucinich and Nancy Pelosi, both met with Assad and had conversations with him. In fact, actually, here's a headline. This is NBC News back in 2007. Pelosi shrugs off Bush's criticism, meets Assad for talks criticized by the White House as undermining American efforts to isolate the hardlined Arab country. And there's Nancy Pelosi meeting with Bashar al-Assad back when he was Syrian president. No further. He's escaped to Russia now. But yes, that's right. This is the same crew of people attacking Tulsi Gabbard, who, I should point out, apparently is having some successful meetings today in the Capitol. We'll get to, I want to address coming up in some detail, Joni Ernst, the Iowa senator, who it seems she's apparently read the writing on the wall. And when I say the wall, I mean all of social media, because conservatives have not been impressed at all. Oh, and there's the breaking news. Joni Ernst is going to support Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. Literally, as I'm talking about her. You should see the social media posts from this lady today on X. One after the other. She's like, great meeting with Tulsi Gabbard. She's going to be great for our country. Great meeting with Kash Patel. He's going to be great for our country. And apparently, Joni Ernst, as literally at this moment, just signaled that she's now supporting Pete Hegseth after she had a 2 p.m. meeting. That was a little over an hour ago. Hour and a half ago. A 2 p.m. meeting with Pete Hegseth. That was her second meeting in 2 weeks. And it went from the very, quote, frank conversations that she was having with him last week to apparently a very joyful conversation today, one in which she is now enthusiastically backing Pete Hegseth to become the next Secretary of Defense. Boy, that's great. And that comes at, remember, when did that come in terms of the sequence of events? It came after you spoke up, one, and two, President Trump posted publicly and J.D. Vance posted publicly that they were sticking by Pete Hegseth. There was all this palace intrigue. Oh, he's going to replace him. It's going to be Ron DeSantis. It's going to be somebody else. No, it ended up being Pete Hegseth by the strength of his own public presence, his own fight, his mother showing up and saying these stories that you're telling of using me as a weapon are a lie, American news media. And now it looks like he's consolidating that support. And I saw Tom Cotton earlier today was telling the press that he's going to get all the Republicans, that all of these nominees are going to get enough Republican votes. Now, I don't know if that's Tom Cotton just wish casting or if he's really giving us a forecast on what's going to happen here. But you began to see the pieces of this all coming into place. President Trump has been deeply insistent that this mandate from his voters requires the Senate to confirm these people. John Thune appeared to fall into place last week by indicating that we're not letting the media do this. We're taking this to real hearings. That's where the Senate will handle this, the advice and consent rule. And now all of these nominees, including the, quote, most controversial nominees, mindless. The word controversial is so mindless. Are all getting very positive hearings from these Republican senators now. And that's thanks to you. That is thanks to your voice and to President Trump for reflecting it. It's great.
Can you shed some light on your conversation with Joni Ernst? It was a very good meeting with the senator. The more you spend, I've known her for 10 years. The more we talk, the more we're reminded of, as two combat veterans, how dedicated we are to defense.
That's Pete Hegseth just moments ago indicating that it was a very good conversation with Joni Ernst. Let's be clear on what her statement was, though. She supports Pete Hegseth moving forward in this process. That's where she is right now. She said she appreciates Pete Hegseth's responsiveness and respect for the process. Following our encouraging conversations, Pete committed to completing a full audit of the Pentagon and selecting a senior official who will uphold the roles and value of our servicemen and women based on quality and standards, not quotas, and who will prioritize and strengthen my work to prevent sexual assault within the ranks. As I support Pete through this process, I look forward to a fair hearing based on truth, not anonymous sources. Very positive movement by Joni Ernst today. Joining us in just moments, Batya Ungar-Sargon. She'll talk about the results of the Daniel Penny trial and how the Democrats are at war with themselves. That's ahead.